undifferentiated being is who you are. That alone exists, and that alone is real. All spiritual practice is simply for the purpose of this non-dual realization. Know this undifferentiated being to alone be your nature, and all is perfect. There is a verse associated with the Upanishads, perhaps familiar to many of you. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudashyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Purnamada Purnamidam, that is perfectly full. This is perfectly full. The emphasis is not so much on this as differentiated from that. The manifest from the unmanifest. All of this from the reality. The emphasis in the verse is on the perfect fullness of Purnam. That is the perfect fullness. The perfect fullness is that. What may be referred to as this is the same perfect fullness. The singular, perfectly full Brahman, which is our real self, is invariable. It is immutable. Hence its perfect fullness. The verse could end just with the first words, that is perfectly full. But the rest of the verse is for purposes of explanation, so that the fullness of that perfect fullness is fully realized. What is known as this is only that. What seems to be one's experience is actually only the self, which is the perfect fullness. Being, which can neither be born nor be destroyed, which does not increase and does not decrease, but remains its undifferentiated self. From the perfect fullness arises or comes forth. Again, the emphasis is not so much on something has come forth, but on the ever-existent perfect fullness. There is nothing else to constitute anyone or anything, anywhere. What is this perfect fullness? The unborn, imperishable existence. If or when that perfect fullness comes from what? From or of the perfect fullness. The perfect fullness alone remains. Before anything is created, there is this perfect fullness. When anything is created or imagined, there is the perfect fullness. After the dissolution of such, there is the perfect fullness. Before the beginning, after the end, all through, you are. that perfect fullness, the infinite, eternal Brahman. That is the real being, undifferentiated. You are not a being of this that has come forth. But if you imagine yourself to be a this that has come forth, and you inquire as the Maharshi instructs, who am I? The thisness, the limitation, the objectivity will be negated as a mere illusion, being entirely unreal. And all that remains is that which is the ever-existent, the perfect fullness of undifferentiated being. The verse is usually concluded with Om Shanti Shanti Shanti, to indicate the superlative peace of this utterly non-dual realization, the perfect fullness which is indestructible. That is, the innate undifferentiated existence of your own self. Inquire to know yourself, and thus realize what the sages throughout all time have been proclaiming to be the truth. Then you yourself are the peace that you experience. And if you have a question at any point this morning, or you want to relate your own experience, please feel free to ask or to speak.
I'm still confused about happiness. Your instruction is for us to find the source of happiness. However, my experience of happiness is sort of more trite than that. It's an emotion. I experience happiness often. And when I if I'm trying to look for the source of it, I would have to ask, what's the difference between that and other emotions, like the source of anger or the source of sorrow? So it might just be the use of the word, happiness. But anyway, so could you please talk about that a little bit more?
When you're in sorrow, you're suffering due to the lack of happiness.
Mm-hmm.
We might regard such then as a form of the desire for happiness.
Okay.
When you're angry, you're annoyed that your happiness has been stolen from you. At the moment you're angry, you don't realize who's robbed who. But what you're angry about is the lack of your happiness. So it is, in a sense, a desire for happiness. Because when you're angry, you don't wish to remain in the angry state. That's not an end in itself. It serves another purpose. And likewise, when you're sorrowing, you're not sorrowing just to remain in grief. Your grief is due to something, the obscuring, veiling, or removal of your own happiness. You may experience various emotions that you regard as forms of happiness. The common element is the happiness. You also experience happiness in the absence of emotions, perhaps more powerfully than with the emotions. Sri Bhagavan often points out the example of deep dreamless sleep, in which there is a profound sense of peace or happiness, but there is evidently no emotions, for there are no thoughts to create the emotions, emotions being a particular pattern of thinking, to which usually undue emphasis is given. You have happiness with or without things. So what is this happiness? You have happiness with or without the emotions, except that when the emotions are removed, you're happier than with them. Does the happiness that you do experience at any time, in light of looking at what we just talked about, Does that happiness come to you from external sources? Do objects provide happiness?
No, I'm clear on that.
Okay. So that when happiness wells up in your experience, it must come from something that's not an object. Is happiness a particular sensation?
It seems like it, for me, it seems like yes, it is.
What kind of sensation is it?
Like bodily, almost, or
Seeing, hearing, tasting, touching? I ruled out smelling, I assumed.
I would say, again, I feel like if I'm in the state that I consider to be happiness, it seems like it's something that I experience, in the chakras or something. That the body feels good.
Do you regard the chakras as bodily?
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever experienced happiness without the sensation you associate with the chakras?
I've never discriminated to that extent.
Look into this. When you're happy in deep sleep, do you experience chakras?
No, but again, then I'm not able to use the word happy in that sense. So I think it's probably just a semantic thing I'm asking. I can use the word peace, but happy, I don't know.
When you're at peace, are you happy? Or do you feel something is lacking?
No, nothing's lacking.
And if you have pleasurable moments, or you're thrilled through some sensation, but you don't have peace, there's also something agitating you, let's say. Are you really happy?
Per your definition, no.
How about for yourself? One of the signs of happiness is that desire subsides. Since in your desires, you're wishing for a state of happiness, however defined, when that happiness is shining or being experienced, desires should subside. If the desires are still there, can you be said to be happy?
Completely, certainly.
And not completely in the sense that it's mixed. And to the degree the desires have subsided, to the degree you found the source of the happiness, to that degree the happiness is shining unobscured. To the degree that such discrimination has not occurred, to that degree the innate happiness is obscured. How many desires have you had?
Lots.
Did the desires arise from outer things, or do they arise from within you?
I'm sorry.
Do the desires arise from outer things? Are they caused by outer things, or do the desires arise from within you?
Unlike happiness, which I can totally say comes from within, I would say that in a mental scenario, I can desire things on the outside. I can desire objects. I can desire states.
Right, and is the desire being produced by the object or produced by your own mind?
Well, by my mind.
When it's thinking of the object.
Yeah.
You've had a great many different kinds of desires.
Mm-hmm.
In all those desires, were you looking for a bodily sensation?
No.
What were you looking for?
Happiness.
If you had the bodily sensations, or the sensations that you said you associated with chakras, and you had those sensations all the time, would that be happiness, or would you grow weary of the sensation?
It certainly would come to be something that, well, it would be something, if I had it all the time, then I'd not like it if I didn't have it, I guess.
What I was trying to point out to you is a discrimination between the sensation and the more subtle happiness. You may wish to examine your experience to see if there's ever been a time when you've been happy, or some degree of happiness has been shining in your experience, when that sensation has not been present. If our happiness is dependent upon bodily sensations, it's in a very precarious situation. There are plenty of things that will cause the bodily sensations to change. Moreover, if you look more deeply within your own experience, you are sure to find that happiness is one thing and sensations are another. Even more subtle sensations, let alone sensory sensations, are one thing. They are passing phenomena. The pleasurable ones you associate with the happiness, the painful ones you don't. That's how it is at present. If you go within, you will find that happiness shines when you find yourself to be transcendent of sensations, transcendent of the body. And that happiness is not a bodily state. It's a state of you, but you are not the body.
I've noticed over the last few weeks, what we were just talking about, the sense of happiness seems to be growing stronger. But as I'm sitting here listening and kind of looking at it, it seems like I'm never really without desire. I mean, there's more of the fullness of happiness, but still the desire is there. So, but I was thinking, if desire is always desire for happiness, that it's kind of an oxymoron. I mean, it's sort of like, the desire is for, that, for happiness. And so I don't know, it's like, it's like a tug of war, or like a play. So I guess maybe that's one way to do the inquiry, is to really kind of look at the desire in opposition of there really is no opposition. But so it's going out here, what it really wants is what's in here.
That's right. When the mind goes outward, what's really desired is entirely inward, looking for in objects, including circumstances, events, and so forth, for something that's not an event or a circumstance or an object at all, but our own self. The power or the motion of those desires, that movement of desire, may be regarded as nothing more than a testimony to the innate wisdom that declares our happiness to be our natural state. And we are not satisfied until we find it completely. We find it completely by knowing it is within and knowing what the withinness is. Since withinness is our own self, it cannot be known in an objective sense. Hence the purpose of self-inquiry, non-objective knowledge. When you find yourself, there's happiness that does not come to an end because your existence does not come to an end. Desires are said to be extinguished because what you were looking for the entire time. Why? It was an intuitive search for your own self. Knowing yourself and being utterly unable to break apart from your own self, your own existence. You yourself then are the happiness. That self is not a body, not a mind, and not an ego. So there's nothing contradictory in it. Go ahead, Tim.
You just mentioned now that happiness or one's own being has nothing to do with body, a mind, or an ego. And that helps me clarify within myself in a deeper way that, yes, it doesn't have anything to do with the ego. Because I have had good experience of my own being, but obviously not a full or complete experience when ideas come in the form of fill in the blank.
Who is it that has had the good experience and for whom arise the ideas?
Well, to be more correct, there's no one to claim the experience. The experience is after the fact. It's more like my own being is the truth, which is where my happiness is.
If you know this, then is there a recurrence of illusion?
Well, yes, that's why I'm speaking up.
Okay.
So
what was being indicated to you is to inquire as for whom the illusion is. What definition makes up you? So-called you.
Right.
Ideas rise up. They rise up for someone, based upon some identity. What is that identity? This is what you need to inquire into.
Okay. There's someone already there before those things rise up. Someone has already...
Find out if there's somebody there.
Okay. Without questioning, then there will be an appearance.
Yes, in lack of inquiry, there will be an appearance of all kinds of nonsense.
Lack of inquiry or lack of questioning, lack of examining.
Yes, we may say, in keeping with the previous discussions we were having, if you don't inquire into the self, you will look for the same thing in that which is non-self. And while the self is not the ego and not the body, and certainly not the senses, so the self may be said to be nonsense, it is really the non-self that is utter nonsense.
That is the experience.
So this conversation is about happiness. It's actually been great.
You're happier?
Yeah, definitely. I think, and the reason is because this conversation that you had with Carol, that discriminating between the sense impression and where happiness comes from, that's so important. And I don't know, it seems pretty obvious, right? The sense impression can never, they're neutral. A sense impression because if you would repeat it, just the actual sensation.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, the senses get pretty dull after a while, right? You can't just keep chugging to the chocolate bar or whatever it is.
Agreed. The mere attempt to satiate the senses and repeating the sensory experience will not in any way provide happiness. If you have a sensation and if you associate it with happiness, if you have 10,000 times repetition of that sensation, you're not 10,000 times happier. Moreover, the senses are neutral, as you say, and are not real. But if with them we attribute our happiness to them, then we'll attribute our suffering to them as well.
Yeah.
And we'll be caught in between the channels of pleasure and pain, which is not a happy state.
And what I was meditating on is that because the mind goes outward, and it just seems like one way to bring it inward is to actually notice where that happiness comes from, that it doesn't come from any object. So it seems like it helps me focus back inward, ultimately.
This is why it figures so prominently in the preamble to the text, "Who am I?" by the Maharishi, and then later appears in the text again as well. If you know the source of happiness, you become detached from everything else. You develop a naturally one-pointed desire for liberation. Your mind is turned inward. You are no longer disturbed or lose your peace over the various vicissitudes and changes of life. You're not dependent on external things. You have the experience within yourself welling up of that perfect fullness, which I mentioned earlier. And not only that, desires become extinguished because you know the source of them. The source of the happiness, the source of the desire for happiness, and that which is capable of experiencing happiness, and the experience, the very substance of happiness itself, are all identical.
Yeah, what is capable of experiencing happiness? That's actually kind of cool.
Yeah. The eyes, ears, nose, the mere intellect, the body, none of these things.
Yeah, the intellect, seems like the senses try to gather the objects, at least in my mind. So it's sort of worldly accumulation of some external happiness, whereas the mind seems like it's more trying to establish reality. What's real? Because, a thought is not very... there really isn't much juice to the thoughts, something...
The only way the mind can establish what is real is by finding its own source.
Yeah, where it's totally...
By knowing what knows it. But if it turns inward to do that, its own form is dissolved.
Yeah, but it seems clear to me that all this... it starts with the eye, and then the mind starts churning for something, right? Trying to figure, okay, something's screwed up here now.
Okay, if you lose track of your identity, something seems out of place. Then the seeking to have it back in place begins. Only if we lose something, we should search for it where we lost it, not outside, elsewhere. From another angle of vision, if one's own senses are doing fine, the external world does not matter much. But if the mind is afflicted, those very same pleasant sensations don't matter much either.
Yeah.
But if the mind is happy and at peace, then there can be aches and pains and what have you, and still one says, no, I'm okay.
Yeah.
Because the identity is not being mixed up with the senses then. From this pattern, we can continue along the same lines. From this pattern, we can see if the inner is content, the outer loses its significance. If the inner is not content, the outer seems to be more significant. But the more one searches outward for what is inward, in the non-self or what is the self, the less the happiness is there. You turn around. That's an inverted view, so turn around.
It seems like it comes down to non-investigation, though. I mean, in other words,
Exactly
because
so.
it's not investigated. It's just going on automatic pilot, which doesn't usually do a very good job finding.
It's called the repetitive cycle of illusion.
Yeah.
But we could call it automatic pilot.
Yeah. It doesn't really get you where you want to go.
No. There's no estimated time of arrival. Now, if you investigate into what is real and where is happiness, and most importantly, who am I? If you inquire, then you find the happiness, the peace, to be innate. Thoughts, sensations, the world no longer disturb. Not only that, you find that that which is bliss innately is also existence in consciousness, apart from which there is no other existence or separate mind.
So you mentioned this on Friday night, that complete detachment was equivalent to realization, or I don't remember the word you used, but would that eliminate, because he went through the body, the senses, and then he went through the mind, individual.
Yes. So the Maharshi says the very same thing, doesn't he? He says vairagya, jnana, dispassion or detachment, and knowledge are the same. One is regarded as adhering to the self, one is regarded as not adhering to the not-self. It amounts to the same thing.
So it's complete then. So in other words, it's so how would the sense of individuality be eliminated in this case? In other words, because
By inquiring to see if it exists.
so there would be some sort of attachment to an external reality.
Why would there be that?
No, I'm just saying that if it wasn't the case, then there would be, I'm just trying to think of that detachment part of it, because it seems like,
To what do you feel attached?
well, it seems like we discussed, it's like if I don't look, or also what you mentioned in Satsang today, right? If I don't inquire, then it could be whatever. It's not permanent, but the mind,
Is it real?
no, because it's so flimsy, right?
So it's impermanent and unreal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, when we speak of detachment, it's like anything else. We don't speak about it just to speak about it. We speak about it for furthering the experience of it. Your own nature is utterly detached. It is the perfect fullness which alone exists everywhere, but it is not attached to any particular thing.
Yeah, that's everything. Yeah, because without that, I don't know, it's just, you wouldn't have anything.
Now, when there appears to be attachment, there is confusion regarding reality, regarding happiness, essentially mixing up what is the self with what is not the self. When there is detachment, there is no such confusion. If we inquire, whose is the attachment? It is just like inquiring, for whom is the misidentification? That false assumption is in itself the substance of attachment, misidentification, ignorance, call it what you want. And that very thing, that very one, referred to as an ego, has no existence, and such is realized as soon as you inquire into its nature. Inquiring thus, you find there are not two states, one with the ego, one without. So Sri Bhagavan says the egoless state is the only real state that there is. Likewise with detachment. In truth, your being is ever detached. It is not connected to anything else because its nature is non-dual and infinite and homogeneous. There is nothing else for it to get attached to. There is nothing in its nature to connect it to anything else. So what we call in practice becoming detached is really recognizing the fact regarding the innate. The same holds true with happiness.
So when you realize it wouldn't obviously be mental, right? Because that's not going to cut the mustard. It wouldn't be sensory, right? Because those, I mean, all these things disappear. So it would be noticing, though, the qualities of that realization. In other words, that it is the source of happiness, that it is the source of peace, or
it is Satchidananda, being consciousness bliss. It is Satchidanam Anandam, the true, the knowledge, the infinite, the limitless.
yeah.
We can be quite sure that since the time of the rishis of the ancient Vedas, they were not talking about a sense experience. Nor were they talking about some merely intellectual recognition. No mere sense experience would earn the appellation of blissful immortality. And no mere mental conception would be called Brahman, or the self. Now the wondrous thing is you are not a sense perception. You are no mere mental conception. What they realized is what you are. So, Self-knowledge is the essence.
Adveshta sarvabhutanam maitra karuna evacha nirmamo nirahankaraha samadukha sukhakshami santushtas satatam yogi yatatma drita nischayaha mayyarpita mano buddhihi yo madbhaktas same priyaha.
He who hates no single being, who is friendly and compassionate to all, who is free from attachment and egoism, to whom pain and pleasure are equal, who is enduring, ever content and balanced in mind, self-controlled and possessed of firm conviction, whose thought and reason are directed to me, he who is thus devoted to me is dear to me.
Yasmano dvijate loko lokano dvijate chayaha harsha marsha bhayo dvegaihi mukto yasacha me priyaha.
He by whom the world is not afflicted, and who is not afflicted by the world, who is free from joy, envy, fear, and sorrow, he is dear to me.
Anapeksha shuchirdaksha udasino gatavyataha sarvarambha parityagi yo madbhaktas same priyaha.
He who is free from wants, who is pure, clever, unconcerned, untroubled, renouncing all undertakings, he who is thus devoted to me is dear to me.
Yo na hrishyati na dveshti na shochati na kankshati shubha shubha parityagi bhaktiman yassa me priyaha.
He who neither rejoices nor hates, nor grieves nor desires, renouncing good and evil, he who is full of devotion is dear to me.
Samashatrau cha mitre cha tadha mana apamanayoho shitoshta sukha dukkheshu samasanga vivarjitaha tulya nindastutir mauni santushto yena kenachit aniketastiramaphi bhaktiman me priyo naraha.
He who is the same to foe and friend, and also in honor and dishonor, who is the same in cold and heat, in pleasure and pain, who is free from attachment, to whom censure and praise are equal, who is silent, content with anything, homeless, steady-minded, full of devotion, that man is dear to me.
Etu dharmyamritamidam yadhoktam padyupasate sraddhadhana matparama bhaktastetiva me priyaha.
They verily who follow this immortal law described above, endued with faith, looking up to me as the supreme and devoted, they are exceedingly dear to me.